Suzuka, 2004. Michael Schumacher's Ferrari 510 at 19,000 RPM, echoing off the grandstands like a war cry from the gods of speed. That sound didn't just fill your ears, it filled your soul. It was danger made audible. It was the sound of men pushing machines beyond what should be possible, because that's what Formula One was supposed to be. Now, listen to this. That's not the sound of speed. That's the sound of a sport that sold its image for sustainability metrics and Netflix subscriptions. If you've been following this sport for over 2 decades, you've seen every regulation change, every political battle, and every attempt to improve F1. And what you're about to see isn't just change, it's systematic erasure of everything that made this sport the pinnacle of motorsport. So, let's walk through every single way they've stripped the heart out of this sport. And trust me, if you're a die-hard F1 fan, every one of these is going to hit you right in the gut. Let's start with what hurts the most, the silence where symphony used to live. See, people who only started watching in the hybrid era don't understand what we lost. The V12 era wasn't just about power, it was about character. Ferrari's flat 12 in the 1970s had a completely different note than the Cosworth DFV. You could identify teams by sound alone during practice sessions. The V10s of the 1990s and 2000s were pure mechanical aggression. Sitting at Eau Rouge in 2003, you could feel those McLaren Mercedes units hit the rev limiter at 19,000 RPM. The sound would literally shake your ribcage. Murray Walker had to pause mid-sentence when cars went past because the audio couldn't handle it. That wasn't just noise, that was the sound of engineering pushed to its absolute limit. Even the V8s, which purists initially complained about, maintained that primal scream. When Sebastian Vettel was dominating in 2011, you could hear his Red Bull Renault coming through maggots and Beckett's from half a mile away. The engine note would build and build until it hit that perfect crescendo at 18,000 RPM. Then came 2014, the hybrid V6 turbos. You could see the collective disappointment at the Melbourne season opener. These weren't just quieter engines, they fundamentally changed the character of F1. The turbo whistle, the MGU-K whine, the fuel-saving modes that meant drivers couldn't even push flat out for entire races. The FIA claimed it was for road relevance, but here's what they didn't understand. F1 was never supposed to be road relevant. It was supposed to be the absolute pinnacle of speed, regardless of what lessons it could teach your Honda Civic. You could feel the disappointment at circuits around the world as that iconic F1 soundtrack disappeared. But they didn't listen to the fans. Attendance dropped at traditional circuits. TV ratings fell in core European markets. Fan forums and surveys consistently showed widespread dissatisfaction with the new engine sounds, but the FIA doubled down, claiming fans would adapt. Well, we adapted by caring less about a sport that no longer got us excited. F1 coverage used to be about racing. Murray Walker didn't need manufactured drama because he had genuine passion for the sport itself. James Hunt would give you technical insights between his colourful commentary. The cameras followed the action, not the soap opera. Then, Netflix launched Drive to Survive in March 2019, covering the 2018 season. And suddenly F1 wasn't about racing anymore, it was about fabricated drama. Now, I'll give credit where it's due. DTS brought new fans to the sport, and growing the fan base isn't inherently bad. But here's what longtime fans noticed immediately. They were creating storylines that simply didn't exist. They took radio messages completely out of context. They turned Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris into bitter rivals. In 2019, when anyone who followed McLaren knew they were actually close friends, they created tension between drivers who barely interacted. For anyone who has followed driver relationships for years through paddock reports and technical briefings, watching Netflix create fake drama was truly painful. The real tragedy is what this did to the drivers themselves. Guys like Lando Norris, who came up through the junior categories as pure racers, now spend more time creating content than studying telemetry data. Charles Leclerc making TikToks when he should be working with his engineers on setup optimization. These aren't just marketing obligations, they're fundamental distractions from what made drivers great. Remember when Kimi Raikkonen could just say, "Leave me alone, I know what I'm doing." That wasn't rudeness, that was a racer's pure focus.
Okay, Kimi, next car behind you is Alonso. I'll keep you updated on the pace.
Just leave me alone, I know what to do.
Kimi understood that every moment spent on content obligations was a moment not spent perfecting his craft. Now drivers have mandatory social media requirements written into their contracts. The sport that once celebrated the pure, unfiltered pursuit of speed now celebrates whoever can generate the most Instagram engagement. It's painful to watch authentic racing moments get overshadowed by fake storylines. Max Verstappen's 2021 championship battle with Lewis Hamilton was one of the greatest seasons in F1 history, but Netflix turned it into a reality TV drama instead of celebrating the incredible racecraft we were witnessing.
Is it going to be a first World Championship for Verstappen? Is it going to be an 8th World Championship for Lewis Hamilton?
F1 used to be distinctly European, and this isn't meant in an exclusionary way. It had grown from a specific racing culture that understood what made motorsport special. The crowd at Monza wasn't just fans. They were custodians of racing heritage who understood the technical nuances of what they were watching. Silverstone wasn't just a circuit, it was the birthplace of the World Championship, where every corner had been shaped by decades of racing evolution. When Liberty Media bought F1 for $4.4 billion in January 2017, they didn't just acquire a sport, they acquired a culture they fundamentally didn't understand. And instead of learning from it, they immediately began reshaping it in America's image. Sprint races are the perfect example. Borrowed directly from American motorsports, they turned qualifying, which used to be this pure one-shot test of speed and bravery, into just one part of a weekend-long show. Sure, the fastest qualifier still gets credited with pole position for Sunday's race, but that achievement now gets overshadowed by Saturday's sprint race and all the points and drama that come with it. The pole position that drivers like Ayrton Senna would risk everything to achieve has been diminished, buried under layers of additional racing that dilute its significance. For anyone who remembers the tension of those final qualifying minutes in the early 2000s, watching sprint weekends cheapen that pure qualifying achievement is genuinely heartbreaking. Miami GP epitomized everything wrong with this approach. The coverage spent more time showing celebrities who couldn't name 5 current drivers than analyzing the actual racing. The fake marina built around a parking lot. The artificial glamour designed purely for social media. It was everything F1 wasn't supposed to be. The racing was processional, but hey, it looked great on Instagram. Las Vegas was even worse. $500 million spent on a street circuit that forced local businesses to close for weeks. Then, just 8 minutes into the first practice session, Carlos Sainz hit a loose manhole cover at high speed, destroying his Ferrari's floor and chassis. The session was red flagged, and fans who had paid hundreds of dollars for tickets were sent home after seeing barely any running. Nobody had bothered to understand that F1 cars create different aerodynamic forces than NASCAR, and the street wasn't properly prepared for the suction these cars generate. But the true insult was the opening ceremony, a Super Bowl halftime show masquerading as F1 tradition. And it's not just the racing that's being sanitized, it's the drivers themselves. The FIA has long-standing safety rules about jewelry in the car, and look, safety is important and jewelry can be a genuine risk in a crash. But in 2022, they started strictly enforcing these rules in a way that felt less about safety and more about control. Lewis Hamilton's battle over his nose ring became symbolic of something bigger, the systematic removal of anything that made drivers unique or personal. They've implemented conduct codes that essentially forbid authentic emotional reactions. Drivers get reprimanded for swearing on team radio, the same passionate outbursts that used to give us actual insight into the pressure they're under. This is classic American corporate thinking. Sanitize everything for maximum brand safety, even when it strips away the personality that made these gladiators compelling in the first place. Meanwhile, Spa-Francorchamps, where Senna mastered the reign in 1985, where Schumacher announced his genius in 1991, contracts got shortened. The German Grand Prix, gone after decades of history. The French Grand Prix, axed despite Paul Ricard's technical challenges. But we need room for 3 American races that prioritize spectacle over sport. Even the podium ceremonies lost their spirit. Those simple champagne celebrations weren't just tradition. They were moments of pure joy after achieving something extraordinary. Now, they're choreographed entertainment, where drivers are forced to perform for cameras instead of celebrating with the mechanics who built their winning machines. This is where it really hurts for anyone who's followed the technical side of F1 for decades. There was a time when you could identify every car on the grid from its silhouette alone. Adrian Newey's Red Bulls had completely different aerodynamic philosophies than Ross Brawn's Mercedes. Ferrari's approach to packaging was written in every curve of their bodywork. The 1980s and early 1990s were an explosion of innovation that we'll never see again. Ground effect cars that literally sucked themselves to the track. Active suspension systems that could adjust mid-corner based on telemetry data. Semi-automatic gearboxes that fundamentally changed how drivers approached racing. Teams were spending hundreds of millions pushing the boundaries of what was physically possible. Now look at the 2022 regulations. Every car looks identical from a distance because the FIA has regulated away any meaningful differentiation. They sold this as closer racing, but what they really created was spec car racing with F1 badges. And now the 2026 regulations are coming. Smaller, lighter cars with even more standardized components and mandatory active aerodynamic systems. Sure, teams will still control when to deploy the movable wings, but the actual technology is specified by the FIA, another step towards standardization. They're systematically removing the areas where teams can innovate and differentiate themselves. The engine regulations tell the whole story of F1's decline. V12s became V10s, V10s became V8s, and V8s became these hybrid V6 units that sound like vacuum cleaners. Each change was justified as progress, but progress toward what? The V10 era produced some of the most spectacular racing in F1 history, with cars that had a raw, mechanical character that modern hybrids simply can't match. But it's not just about speed, it's about variety and character. Modern cars might be faster through corners thanks to advanced aerodynamics, but they all achieve that speed in essentially the same way. The V10 era had teams exploring wildly different approaches to power delivery, aerodynamics, and setup philosophy. Now, fuel flow restrictions mean every engine produces roughly the same power. Engine mode bans eliminated the strategic variety that made races unpredictable. Parc fermé rules prevent teams from optimizing setups between qualifying and race. Every regulation is designed to reduce the gap between genius and mediocrity. Remember qualifying in the early 2000s? 1 hour, 12 laps, pure speed. Drivers had one chance to find that perfect lap. That moment where man and machine transcended physics. Michael Schumacher's pole lap at Monaco in 1996 wasn't just fast. It was poetry written in tire smoke and bravery.
Or will it be an improvement? Yes! Schumacher by over half a second. Look at Jean Todd's face. He is delirious.
Now we have artificial elimination zones and mandatory tire compounds. The drivers used to be gladiators. Flawed, passionate, human gladiators who wore their hearts on their racing suits. James Hunt lived like every day might be his last, because in F1 it might have been. Nigel Mansell drove with such desperate hunger that you could feel it through the television. Gilles Villeneuve attacked every corner like it owed him money.
Gilles Villeneuve wins a fantastic drive, resisting pressure all the way.
Now every interview sounds like it was written by a PR committee. Drivers have become polished corporate spokespeople, and their authentic personalities have been suppressed by the demands of commercialism and brand safety. The path to F1 has become a financial transaction rather than a sporting achievement. Lance Stroll bought his way in when his father purchased Racing Point. Rumor has it, Nicholas Latifi paid Williams around $30 million for his seat because his billionaire father could afford it. Logan Sargent got fast-tracked because F1 needed an American driver for marketing purposes. Compare that to Lewis Hamilton, who came from a working-class family in Stevenage. His father, Anthony, worked multiple jobs just to fund Lewis's karting career. That's what the old system rewarded, pure talent overcoming financial obstacles through sheer determination. The old path was brutal but pure. Karting, Formula Ford, Formula 3, Formula 2, then maybe F1 if you were exceptional. Drivers learned racecraft through years of wheel-to-wheel combat in underpowered cars where skill mattered more than sponsorship. Now they spend more time in simulators than on actual tracks, more time creating posts than developing racecraft. The great rivalries developed naturally through years of competition. Niki Lauda and James Hunt's legendary battle in 1976 was born from completely different philosophies. The methodical Austrian perfectionist versus the charismatic British playboy. Senna and Prost didn't need Netflix to create drama. Their philosophical differences about racing created genuine conflict that elevated both drivers. Schumacher and Hill's rivalry was born from real on-track incidents and competing approaches to racing. Now Netflix creates fake rivalries in editing rooms because the real drivers are too media-trained to show actual emotion. Monaco used to be untouchable, and for good reason. It wasn't about overtaking, it was about perfection under pressure. It was the one place where money couldn't buy you speed, where technology couldn't overcome talent, where one mistake meant everything. Senna in the Rain in 1984 wasn't just a fast lap, it was a moment when a human being transcended his limitations. Now, Monaco is constantly under threat because it doesn't generate enough exciting racing for audiences who don't understand that some races test to different qualities. It was about precision, about finding that extra tenth when there was no margin for error. Schumacher's pole lap in 1996 was half a second faster than Damon Hill's much faster Williams. Not because his car was better, but because he found speed where physics said it shouldn't exist. Team names changed based on sponsorship deals, erasing decades of heritage. Sauber became BMW Sauber, then back to Sauber, then Alfa Romeo Racing, and now they're Sauber again. How is anyone supposed to build lasting loyalty to a team that changes identity every few years? Toro Rosso became AlphaTauri, then RB, and who knows what they'll be called next season. Murray Walker's commentary came from legitimate love of the sport. When he screamed, "Go, go, go," during an overtake, you felt his passion.
3 lights, 4 lights, 5 laps. Go, go, go!
He didn't need to explain what DRS was because he assumed his audience shared his obsession with the technical details. Now, commentators spend half their time explaining basic concepts to Netflix audiences instead of providing insight for people who actually understand racing. Martin Brundle's grid walks used to be masterclasses in F1 knowledge. He talked to Adrian Newey about aerodynamic concepts, or get insights from team principals about strategic decisions. Now, they're celebrity hunting expeditions, where Brundle has to explain who he is to influencers who don't know why they're there. Race weekends used to build towards Sunday's Grand Prix like a 3-act play. Practice sessions had meaning. Teams were really learning about their cars, trying different setups, pushing boundaries. Now, they're entertainment festivals with concerts and social media posts that dilute the actual competition. There was a time when F1 was expensive but not impossible for real fans. A working-class racing enthusiast could save up for Silverstone tickets and sit in grandstands filled with people who understood every technical nuance of what they were watching. The sport belonged to people who lived and breathed racing. F1's revenue has grown from $1.8 billion in 2017 to over $3 billion in 2025. But at what cost? Monaco GP tickets that cost over $200 in 2010 now cost close to $1,000. Silverstone general admission went from $132 to $267 in just 5 years. The passionate fans who created the atmosphere are being priced out and replaced by corporate guests who check their phones during qualifying. Traditional grandstands where 3 generations of families would sit together are being replaced with expensive hospitality suites where executives network during the race. The atmosphere that made places like Silverstone and Monza special is being systematically destroyed in favor of corporate revenue. Every session is now sponsored beyond recognition. The sport that once let its actions speak for itself now can't go 30 seconds without a commercial message. The budget cap was supposed to level the playing field, but it's actually reduced innovation. Teams that once pushed technological boundaries are now restricted by accountants rather than physics. Driver salaries have exploded while the barrier to entry has gotten higher. Meanwhile, truly talented drivers from developing countries can't find seats because they don't bring enough sponsorship money. The sport has become a financial instrument that happens to involve cars going in circles. Here's what we've really lost for anyone who's watched this sport evolve for decades. It's not just the sound of the engines or the danger or the traditions, it's the authenticity that made F1 matter. When Ayrton Senna cried after losing the 1988 Italian Grand Prix, it wasn't for cameras. It was genuine heartbreak from a man who had given everything and come up short. When Michael Schumacher finally won with Ferrari in 2000, those tears were real because the struggle had been real. Anyone who watched every race of that campaign saw him deal with the pressure, the mechanical failures, the weight of Ferrari's expectations. That emotion was earned through years of raw competition. Now, drivers can't have real reactions because everything is filmed and turned into social media clips. F1 used to be so unpredictable because the margins were so fine that anything could happen. A mechanical failure could promote a backmarker to victory. A strategic gamble could pay off spectacularly or fail catastrophically. Now the excitement is made through DRS zones and predetermined tyre strategies. Classic F1 fans were obsessed with every technical detail, every strategic nuance, every piece of racing history. They didn't just watch F1, they studied it. Modern F1 attracts casual viewers who watch for drama, not racing. They cheer for personalities, not performance. They consume content, not competition. The passionate fans who understood what made F1 special are walking away because the sport they loved no longer exists. For those who have that memory, Suzuka, 2004, the sound of Schumacher's Ferrari screaming past the grandstand. The way it made your chest vibrate. The way it made you believe that human beings could transcend physics through pure will and skill. That moment represents everything we've lost. The spectacle is bigger than ever. The profits are higher than ever. The global reach is wider than ever. But the soul is somewhere in the past, buried under corporate presentations and Netflix storylines and sustainability initiatives. Hit that like button if you remember the sound of a V10 at full song. Subscribe if you believe F1's greatest days shouldn't just be memories. And tell me in the comments, what's the one thing about classic F1 that you miss the most? Because the only way to honor what we've lost is to never stop talking about what made it worth loving in the first place.